Once upon a time, there lived a woman whose name was Simi. She was the kind of woman every woman dreamed to be: elegant, successful, and always in control. She ran her interior design company like how a general runs an army. Her home was run like a palace with a queen. Simi was always in control of everything around her. However, there was one thing Simi could not control: her daughter Ivana. Ivana was 16, spoiled beyond redemption, and believed the world revolved around her. She had grown up surrounded by wealth, private drivers, cooks, and imported toys. By the time she turned 15, she spoke to her mother like she was a housemaid. "Mom, please, I'm not a baby. All my friends are in boarding school. Why can't I go too?" she would yell. Her father, Chief Duru, thought sending her to boarding school would make her disciplined, but his wife Simi disagreed. But Chief remained firm. Then she would have to learn. "You can't pamper her forever," he said to Simi, who had no other option but to agree. So, against her will, Ivana was enrolled at St. Felicia's College, one of the most prestigious schools in Nigeria. Simi cried the day they dropped her off. As the car drove away, she looked back and saw her daughter walking into the dorm with her head held high, like a princess entering her palace. But that night, Simi could not sleep. She tossed and turned, thinking about her only child, her baby, in a strange place, surrounded by strangers. 3 weeks later, she got a call from one of the teachers, who told her something that froze her blood. "Madam," she whispered over the phone, "your daughter, she's becoming a problem. She bullies the junior students. She even slapped one girl last night. We've tried to correct her, but she claims to be untouchable." Simi's hand shook as she held her phone. Her own daughter? A bully? Impossible! That night, she sat in her bedroom, thinking. Her husband was asleep beside her, snoring softly, but her mind could not rest. She came up with the wildest idea of her life and decided to go through with it. The next morning, she told her husband that she had just gotten a big contract in Port Harcourt and needed to travel in 2 days. Chief Duru did not read any meaning into her trip. His wife Simi was a sought-after interior designer who traveled regularly for work. He sent her a huge amount of money to cover her traveling expenses, but Simi used part of the money to prepare her fake document. She drove straight to St. Felicia's Academy and enrolled as a student. Simi used the fake name, Sandra Okezie, and decided to disguise herself in a way that her daughter Ivana would never suspect. She changed her voice, wore a nose mask at all times, claiming to be allergic to dust. "If I remove it, I'll start sneezing non-stop," she said to the principal, who permitted her to use the nose mask at all times. Simi was led to the female dormitory, where she caught sight of her daughter pouring water on another student who mistakenly stepped on her. Ivana was a completely different person from the daughter that she knew. She stood there and watched as the poor junior screamed, drenched from head to toe. "Next time you see me coming, jump out of the way," Ivana barked, dropping the bucket and brushing invisible dust off her shoulders. Her friends giggled, clapping and cheering as if she had just done something heroic. Simi stood there shocked. She gripped her suitcase so tightly that her knuckles turned white. Ivana caught sight of her and decided to establish her boundaries. She could see that the new student was way older and could not help but feel threatened. Simi's heart skipped a bit as she watched her own daughter approach. Ivana's voice was sharp, commanding, the kind of tone that could silence an entire dormitory. "Why are you wearing that mask?" Ivana asked, folding her arms as she looked her up and down suspiciously. All the girls turned their attention to the new student as they whispered and giggled nervously. Simi kept her head bowed, her palms sweating beneath the sleeves of her uniform. "I'm allergic to dust," she said softly. "If I take it off, I start sneezing non-stop." Ivana laughed and called her a walking allergy. They don't burst into laughter as Simi watched her own daughter humiliate her. Even the shy girls who usually avoided trouble could not help but laugh, because when Ivana laughed, everyone else was expected to laugh as well. "Imagine," Ivana continued mockingly, her hands on her waist. You came to a boarding school with dust everywhere and you are allergic to dust?
You must be in the wrong school, Auntie, Ivana said as she walked closer and tried to take the mask off her face. Simi could hear her heart beating in that moment. She could not let her daughter find out that she was the one. So, she had to act fast to make sure that Ivana does not take off the mask. Simi began to cough sporadically. She coughed so hard that Ivana moved back and stared at her in disgust. Ivana jumped back instantly, fanning her face. Ew! What's wrong with you? She shouted, wrinkling her nose. Simi coughed again, holding her stomach and pretending to wheeze. I told you, she rasped weakly. I'm allergic to dust. If the mask comes off, it gets worse. The other girl scrambled away from her bunk as if she carried a plague. Ivana hissed, stepped aside. I beg, just stay away from me. Oh. I don't want to catch whatever you have. Simi nodded slowly, clutching her chest. Okay, I'm sorry. The laughter died down, replaced by whispers. Ivana rolled her eyes and turned to her friends. Come on, girls, let's go. This one is a walking bacteria, she said as she walked away with her friends. Simi quietly walked to the farthest bunk in the room. She dropped her box and sat down, her heart aching with every breath. This was not the same child that she had raised. This was something else, something that she believed pride and privilege had created. That night, as the dorm lights went out, Simi stared at the ceiling and cried, her tears soaking through her pillow as she thought of what to do. Lord, she whispered, help me reach my daughter before I lose her completely. Simi cried quietly under her blanket, her heart heavy with guilt as she wondered where she went wrong. The next morning, whilst everyone was getting ready for classes, Ivana laid on her bed asleep. No one dared to wake her up, as they could not stand her wrath. Simi walked angrily to her bed as she pulled the bed sheet off her in one swift motion. Ivana, she said sharply, her voice trembling but firm. Get up, you're late for class. The entire dorm froze. You could hear a pin drop in that moment. No one, absolutely no one, had ever dared to wake Ivana before. Ivana opened her eyes slowly, blinking in disbelief. Then she sat up, her face tightening with irritation as she asked who dared to touch her bed. Simi stood her ground as she began to speak. I did. You're late, and everyone else is already ready for class. Before she could finish her sentence, Ivana gave her a very hot slap across her face. The sound sliced through the room like lightning.
It was hot, sharp and humiliating, and it took Simi every ounce of courage not to react. She staggered backwards, one hand flying to her cheek as the room fell silent. The sting burned deep, not just on her face, but in her soul. Her own daughter, her own flesh and blood, had just slapped her across the face. Ivana stood tall, eyes blazing, her chest heaving as she pointed at Simi. Don't you ever touch my bed again, she shouted. Do you know who I am? I'm sure that people like you will never have the privilege of knowing, because not only are you poor and disgusting, you are also dumber than dumbness itself, she said as she sat on her bed furious. Simi walked out of the dorm room angry. She could not sit back and watch her daughter destroy herself, so she decided to cook up a plan. Later that evening, Simi pretended to be weak and clumsy as she spilled dirty mop water on Ivana's bed. Ivana returned a few minutes later to the horrifying sight. She stopped dead in her tracks as her eyes widened in shock as she stared at the puddle of dirty water soaking through her pink bedsheet, the same bed she guarded like a throne. Her heart burned with anger as she began to wail angrily. Who did this? She shouted, her voice sharp enough to make the entire dorm go silent. Simi stood beside the mop bucket, clutching it nervously, pretending to be frightened. I'm so sorry, Ivana, she stammered. I was mopping the floor and I tripped. I didn't mean to. Ivana's face darkened with rage. You what? You poured dirty water on my bed? She stormed towards her, her slippers slapping hard against the wet floor. Ivana, I'm sorry. Before Simi could finish, Ivana grabbed the bucket and emptied what was left of the dirty water all over her head. The dorm gasped. Water splashed across Simi's uniform. drenching her from head to toe. She stood there trembling as the girls covered their mouths in shock. Ivana sneered, her chest rising and falling rapidly. Maybe next time you watch where you're going, you old fool. Now, clean this up before I lose my mind. Simi blinked slowly, her mask dripping as she stood there. Didn't you hear me? Ivana shouted, picking up the mop and throwing it at her feet. Clean this up. You think because you're wearing a mask that you're special? You're nothing. Tears burned in Simi's eyes, but she held them back. She bent down slowly and began wiping the floor right in front of her own daughter. The dorm was dead silent. No one dared to move. Even the girls who idolized Ivana looked uneasy. The scene was too cruel, and that was when the door burst open. What is going on here? It was the house mistress, Mrs. Chika. Her eyes darted from the drenched mattress to the dripping woman on the floor. Who did this? She demanded, but no one spoke. Mrs. Chika's gaze fell on Ivana. Miss Ivana Duru, is this your doing? Ivana scoffed. She messed up my bed, ma. I just wanted to teach her a lesson. Enough! Mrs. Chika snapped. Do you realize how serious this is? You poured dirty water on another student? Are you out of your mind? But ma, I said enough! The woman turned to the rest of the dorm. You witnessed this, right? The girls exchanged glances. Slowly, one by one, they nodded. Mrs. Chika's jaw tightened. Everyone here will serve as witness in the report I'm writing to the principal. Ivana's confident face faltered. Ma, please! No, Ivana, Mrs. Chika cut her off. You've been warned too many times. This time, you've gone too far. The next morning, the entire school gathered at assembly. The principal herself stood before the crowd, holding a file. Her expression was grim. Yesterday, an unfortunate incident occurred in the girls' dormitory. One of our senior students decided to pour dirty mop water on a fellow student in front of witnesses. A murmur rippled through the students. She turned to Ivana, who stood trembling, her head bowed. Ivana Duru, the principal said, your behavior is unacceptable. From this moment, you are hereby suspended from all school privileges for 1 week, and as part of your punishment, you will wash and disinfect every single toilet in this school alone. The crowd gasped. Let this be a lesson to everyone. The principal continued. Arrogance, pride and cruelty have no place in St. Felicia's College. That afternoon, Ivana knelt in the sun, scrubbing toilets with gloved hands, while students passed by and whispered. Her once perfect hair was tied up roughly. Her face was streaked with sweat and shame. From the far corridor, Simi stood quietly, watching. Her heart ached, but she didn't move. For once, her daughter was not surrounded by followers. She wasn't laughing. She wasn't cruel. She was silent, humbled, and finally facing the consequences of her actions. Simi was so delighted to see it. She hoped that this would change her daughter into a respectable young woman. Night came, and Ivana returned to her dorm room in tears. She spent the night crying, and Simi felt so terrible for what had happened. Simi cried silently in her bed. She could not stand to see her daughter in pain. However, she knew that this was a necessary lesson for Ivana to learn, a lesson that would save her life from the danger that loomed ahead. The next morning, Simi was about leaving the hostel for classes when Ivana approached her to apologize for what she did. Simi could not believe her eyes. She froze. Her daughter, the same Ivana who once slapped her, humiliated her, and poured dirty water on her, was now standing right before her, her head bowed and her eyes glistening with tears. I'm sorry. Ivana's voice trembled. Sandra, please, I'm sorry. Simi turned slowly, her heart thumping in her chest. She had imagined this moment 1,000 times, but never like this, never so sincere, so soft or human. Ivana took a step closer, wringing her fingers nervously. I'm sorry for everything, for the way I treated you, for the things I said, for everything I did to you. Simi blinked in disbelief, her mouth slightly open behind her mask. You apologizing? Ivana nodded quickly. Yes, I was stupid, proud, arrogant. I don't even recognize myself anymore. I thought being feared meant being respected, but now I see how wrong I was. Her voice broke. Please, Sandra, Please forgive me. Simi could feel her throat tighten. She wanted to cry, to pull her daughter into her arms and tell her that everything was fine. But she could not. Not yet. Not as Sandra. Still, she whispered softly, "It's okay, Ivana. I forgive you." Ivana looked up, her eyes wet but hopeful. "Can we be friends?" Simi's heart melted instantly. "Friends?" Ivana nodded eagerly. "Please, I don't have any real ones here. Everyone just pretends to like me. But you're different." Simi felt a tear roll down beneath her mask. "Of course," she said softly. "We can be friends." And for the first time since Simi entered that school, her daughter smiled at her, not with arrogance but warmth. From that day, Ivana changed. She stopped bullying other students. She stopped shouting at juniors or mocking people. She started attending classes early, often sitting beside Simi, sharing her notes, and even defending the weaker students from other seniors. Everyone in the dorm noticed the transformation. The same Ivana, who once commanded fear, now offered help. She cleaned her corner, helped juniors with assignments, and even greeted teachers politely. Simi could not believe her eyes. At night, she would lie on her bed and whisper prayers of gratitude. "Thank you, Lord. You've answered me. My daughter has changed." She began to cherish every moment with Ivana. They studied together, shared stories, and laughed quietly in the dorm. Sometimes, Ivana would even sneak her snacks and whisper, "Sandra, I saved this for you. You're my only true friend here." Those words pierced deep into Simi's heart. She had done what no one else could, reach her daughter's heart. Days turned into weeks, and the entire school began to talk about Ivana's transformation. Teachers praised her, students admired her, and even the principal commended her during assembly. Simi was overjoyed. She walked around smiling beneath her mask, her heart swelling with pride to see that her daughter had changed. However, what Simi did not know was that Ivana had something up her sleeves. One evening, as the lights dimmed in St. Felicia's dormitory, Ivana sat quietly on her bed, pretending to read. Her face was calm, but inside, her thoughts were burning. She had forgiven Simi, at least. That was what everyone believed. But deep down, Ivana could not let go of the humiliation, the punishment, the mockery, the whispers. Even though the school now praised her transformation, Ivana still saw Simi as the reason her perfect image had been destroyed. So, she decided to pay her back in the worst way possible. After all, they were now friends, and no one would ever suspect that she would ever do such to her own friend. That night, Ivana returned from prep early. She reached under her bed and pulled out her small electric kettle, one that no one knew that she had. Ivana cut open a small part of the wire to expose the bare copper that was inside. She then plugged the kettle into the socket near Simi's bunk, twisting the wire so that the bare copper touched the metal frame of her bed. She quickly rushed out of the dorm room so as not to be there when her plan unfolded. Her heart pounded as she snuck out of the dorm room. For a moment, her hands trembled as she wondered if anyone had seen her. Hours later, the students returned to their rooms. Simi, oblivious to what Ivana had done, approached her bed and tried to drop her books on the bed, when suddenly the current passed through her body like a wave. Simi let out a very terrifying scream as she fell to the ground unconscious. The students scampered, terrified as Ivana rushed into the room, pretending to be concerned. To her surprise, she saw her own mother being rushed out of the dorm room to the school hospital. Ivana could not believe her eyes. She had just electrocuted her own mother, the same woman who she loved with all of her heart. Ivana, in her wildest dreams, could not believe that her mother was the same woman who she had bullied, mocked and humiliated for weeks. Her knees buckled as she watched the teacher rush her mother to the hospital, her mask half burnt from the electrocution. "Mommy!" Ivana whispered, her voice trembling. "No! No, this can't be real!" she said as tears poured out of her eyes like a fountain. The female dormitory was now in chaos as Ivana stood frozen, her mind spinning, her chest tightening as reality began to sink in. She had done this. She, Ivana Duru, just electrocuted her own mother. Minutes later, Simi was rushed to the hospital unconscious. The smell of burnt fabric, lingered on her uniform as the doctors did everything possible to save her life. Ivana remained in her dorm room, broken, as she prayed to God to save her mother's life. Hours later, her father arrived at school, too furious to comprehend all that was happening. All the while, he believed that his wife was in Port Harcourt for a contract. Little did he know that she disguised herself as a student and enrolled in her daughter's school. What was even more shocking was the fact that Ivana did this horrible thing to her own mother. Chief Duru in that moment requested that his daughter be transferred to a military school in town, where Ivana would have no other option but to be disciplined. 3 days later, Simi woke up in the hospital. Her husband informed her that their daughter Ivana had been transferred to a military school, the same school that he attended so many years ago. Simi felt so terrible about it. However, at this point, she knew that Ivana needed all the discipline that she could get. Her husband asked why she did what she did, and Simi, with tears in her eyes, turned her face away in shame. She had gone undercover to save her own daughter and almost lost her life in the process. She looked back at her husband, her heart breaking as she began to speak. Our daughter was slipping away from us, Duru. She was turning into a stranger, and I had to do something about it. I thought I could fix her quietly before the world ruined her completely. However, what I saw these past weeks was more than horrendous. Our own daughter turned out to be my worst nightmare. She almost killed me, she said to Chief, who sat beside her to comfort her. He narrated how broken Ivana was and how his decision to transfer her to a military school would straighten her out in no time. Nigerian Navy Secondary School was a school known to instill discipline, even in the worst behaved children, and Chief, being an alumni, knew it was the only place that could truly break and rebuild their daughter. Months passed, and Ivana's life in the military school was nothing like she had ever imagined. There were no servants, no luxury, no one to bow at her command. She woke up at 4:30 every morning to the sound of a whistle, scrubbed toilets, washed her uniforms by hand, and ate whatever she was served. Every mistake came with punishment, not the kind that humiliated her, but the kind that taught responsibility. Slowly, her arrogance began to melt away. For the first time in her life, she understood the meaning of humility, hard work, and respect. By the end of the term, Ivana had transformed into a completely different girl, quiet, obedient, and thoughtful. When she returned home for the holidays, she walked into the living room, knelt before her parents, and burst out in tears. "Mommy, Daddy, I'm sorry," she said, her voice shaking. "I've learned my lesson. Pride almost destroyed me. I'll never take your love for granted again." Simi held her close, tears streaming down her face as she whispered, "That's all I ever wanted, my child, to bring you back before the world destroys you." And from that day, Ivana became the daughter her parents had always prayed for, humble, kind, and wise, having learned the hardest lesson of all, that pride always comes before a fall. The lesson to be learned from this story is that pride and disobedience always leads to destruction, no matter how beautiful they appear at first. A child who refuses correction invites pain into their own life, and a parent who loves must sometimes take drastic measures to save their child from themselves. Ivana learned the hard way that true strength is not in arrogance or control, but in humility, discipline, and respect. In the end, life has a way of humbling those who refuse to humble themselves. I hope